Welcome back to Felicity Was Here. I'm Heather.
I'm Melissa.
And I'm Dr. Joe.
And today we're discussing Felicity Season 1, Episode 20, Connections. Hello, ladies. How's it going?
It's going.
Hey, good.
Is everyone ready for summer?
Almost.
I am so ready. I have a week and a half worth of work left before we're on summer break.
Well, we're on Episode 20. I can't believe we are this close to the end of Season 1. But as a reminder, last week, Sean came up with a brilliant idea to create a documentary about college life, where Felicity and the gang confessed a lot of feelings. Felicity and Noel expressed that they both still love each other, but they're trying to become friends again. And Ben lost a lot of money gambling, but still has a big debt to pay off. So this week on Connections, Felicity gets to fill in as manager or assistant manager of Dean Deluca, but her personal life throws her some curveballs per usual. She and Noel are on the verge of becoming more than friends again, while Ben is out of options to pay off his gambling debt. Meanwhile, Elena starts temping for Professor McGrath in the evenings. So this week we open up in Felicity's room. She's telling Sally about her mean boss, Abby, the one who won't look at her in the eyes. But she's decided to put Felicity in charge at Dean Deluca for a few days while she's out, and this will serve as a test for a potential promotion and raise for next year. And I was like, oh my God, we're already talking about next year, sophomore year. It's crazy.
Yeah,
we're so close to the end.
Yeah, I feel like a lot changes, so this is getting exciting, as we come closer to the end of the season. So much ahead.
Yeah. But I will say I think this episode is my cheating episode. Like, Melissa hates cheating and skips it. I think this is the one that I like. I just am so uncomfortable watching it for so many reasons. Like, a lot of the storylines, I'm just like, this is like, because people make really bad decisions over and over. And it's just, I get really uncomfortable in this one. So I don't usually watch this one a lot. It's very intense.
Like, a lot of cringe happening. Like, why did you do that? That was terrible.
Not just cringe, but it's like, they like keep making matters worse for themselves, or like people digging themselves into a deeper hole. I mean, Felicity does that all the time, but this one, for whatever reason, I feel like there's a few characters doing that in this episode, and it makes me uncomfortable. But
yeah,
we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
So Felicity was trying to tie a tie for her Dean Deluca uniform. She has like a little white collared shirt and a black tie. But she can't do it because we're not used to, as women, tying ties. So, of course, she goes and knocks on Noel's door for help and asks him to tie the tie. And he does the whole, like, standing behind her. And, he's got his arms wrapped around her, tying the tie for her. And it was all very intimate. And Noel's like, oh, yeah, you look very managerial. But, you can tell he's, like, pining for her. And so as she goes to leave, she then barges back in and she says, this whole just friends thing is really confusing and kind of sucks. And Noel agrees. So there's definitely some feelings still brewing between them.
Mm-hmm. So I found just right off the bat at the beginning of the show, I was noticing a lot of role reversals and identity shifting. Especially the more I watch the episode, and I'll keep pointing it out. But right off the bat, Felicity's being put in charge. She's being put in a different role, role of authority. And usually that's not the case. Usually she has difficulties, navigating with her relationships with authorities, like, are we good kind of stuff. And so that's interesting. And then the whole friends dating kind of, back and forth, like what roles are they occupying in their relationship dynamic with each other right now. And it's also kind of messed up. Hold on. I'll save that part for later. But I saw a different show recently where the woman had to put on a tie also for her work uniform, and the guy took it off of her and put it on himself and tied it on himself and then put it back on her, and then she just tightened it up instead of like doing the whole like I'm gonna like hover over you and be intimate thing. And I thought, because I watched that show very recently, that it was this one. And then when he did that, I was like, oh my gosh, you have some boundaries, man. What's going on here? So it threw me off when I saw that. But it was like, it's just another way to highlight the confusion with their status with each other right now. So it's just interesting.
What was the other show that you were watching?
I can't remember.
It's sounding so familiar.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, I was
Yeah.
watching Party of Five a lot recently, and I don't know if that happened, but I don't know. I watched so many shows like in
Okay.
rapid fire that I can't even keep track. I have no idea what it was.
I feel like I can like see it in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, that's the way you do that when you're, being appropriate, because it was like, oh, is he gonna cross the line or not cross the line type of thing, and then he didn't, and I was like applauding that. I was like, yes, that's the way it's done, and then that didn't happen when I was watching this episode. I was like, shoot.
But I don't know if it did cross the line with Felicity. Like, I think
Well,
she
yeah.
was kind of okay with it, you know? Like, she was like, oh, he's got his arms around me, and there was
Yeah.
sexual tension, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, who knows what they are. Like, she could also ask anyone for help with the tie, and she went to Noel, you know? But,
Well, he is the RA.
yeah, but like, she could go to work and be like, hey,
Yeah.
Abby, how do I tie this thing, you know?
Oh, Abby would fire her on the spot if she did that. So you
Yeah,
can't.
no promotion for you.
No.
So then at Dean and Deluca, when Felicity's working, Ben kind of comes up to her in a hurry and asks if he can work because he needs the money. And Felicity says that that's okay. She'll just work something out in the schedule. And then another employee, Danny, who we've just met for the first time, approaches Felicity, and he's got this very like Eeyore mood about him. Like, he's very like sad sack, like, I'm kind of bumbling, and like he does everything wrong, right? And so he says that a pie plate broke. He's like, do you know where the Band-Aids are? And Felicity's not really paying attention or looking at him. She's like, oh, I think the first aid kit's blah, 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 blah. And he's like, oh, well, and he holds up his hand, which is like gushing blood all over this gauze. And Felicity freaks out. She's like, oh my God, like, put that away. People are staring. And yeah, that's probably a health hazard. Like, good
Right.
thing the
It
health
looked like a
department's
horror
not there.
movie.
Yeah, it was gross.
Yeah.
So
Who does Danny? He's played by the guy from
Booger.
Nerds, right?
Yes, that's the one. The
Booger?
one and only.
That's what I thought.
That's the only thing I can think of when I see him is Booger. Look, it's Booger.
I was gonna say Animal House. I had the wrong
Close
80s
enough.
movie. Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah. Booger.
Yeah, because I was watching this and my husband walked downstairs and he's like, Booger? I'm like, oh yeah, Booger's in here.
Booger works at Dean and Deluca?
So he goes and gets some Band-Aids in the back, and then Abby shows up as she is leaving, and of course she's not looking at Felicity, but Felicity thanks her for the opportunity, and she's like, yeah, because, you know, I thought you hated me. So again, we're like, oh yeah, growth and changing roles, but no, she's still saying like, oh, do you hate me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, keep that in your thought bubble, not your speech bubble.
But Abby admits, she says, maybe I do. You're young and perky, and then there's the hair. But she's like, but we're not here to talk about your hair, Felicity. And I just thought that whole exchange was hilarious. But if Felicity does everything right in these next few days, they'll be able to talk about this assistant manager position. But then as she leaves, last thing she wants Felicity to do is, while she's out, Felicity has to fire Danny, which I think is very inappropriate.
Yes, that was my other observation with like the role, not just role reversals, but role shifts. That's just really weird. She's 17 probably still, because I don't think she had a birthday. So that's really young to be putting that responsibility on somebody, because you don't know how somebody's going to react. That's just really gross that she laid that on her. And then Felicity, of course, was like, okay. Like, she doesn't protest at all. She's just like, yes, I need to prove myself.
Well, she was like, oh, isn't that something you should maybe do? She's like, well, maybe I should, you know, I'm not going to, or I don't know. Abby's weird.
Yeah. So she kind of was like trying to slip out of it, but like probably in her head, like, I think she's very motivated for that promotion. So she doesn't push back too hard on it. She's like, okay.
Well, yeah, she thinks she hates her. Like, why rock the boat?
Exactly. So it's like, yeah, I better do what she says and like, yeah, fully not be hated.
But yeah, like, what other hourly paid barista would be forced to fire someone? Like, that's just, yeah.
Especially when they don't even have that position yet. Like, she's not even any kind of manager or anything. Yeah.
Elena, meanwhile, goes to McGrath's office and knocks to drop off an outline, but he's not there. So she kind of just walks in to drop something on his desk. But then, just at that moment, McGrath does come in, and he does appear slightly distressed. So Elena, of course, asks if he's all right. He says he's fine, but it's been a tough week. And his assistant is out to make matters worse. So he's So he's just, bogged down in paperwork. Poor guy.
Boo-hoo.
Exactly. So Elena, being the overachiever that she is, offers her help. And he says, well, if you're free in the evenings, there's probably some paperwork that you can do, maybe for extra credit. But Elena says that he doesn't have to do that. Like, oh, you don't have to offer me extra credit. She says it'd be a great learning experience. I'm like, what learning experience is there from doing paperwork?
It's just her trying to be gracious and sound like
I
really
know.
appreciative. It's like, but yeah, like, come on now.
Yeah. And, well, he says yes, because, yeah, if she's got some free evenings, he'll take the help. And so, unfortunately, as she leaves, she's kind of grinning like a fool, and it makes me very uncomfy. But I will say she had like a huge glow up in this episode. She has a new hairdo, and it like lasts her glow up like lasts the rest of the series. I just think like in this episode, for some reason, she like settles into her own style and looks amazing. I loved her look in this episode.
Do you think they are trying to like make her look a little bit older or
I
more
think so.
mature so that this situation made more sense?
I think that's definitely a possibility. Because I feel like she was wearing, not to say that she needed more makeup, but I do feel like she was wearing more like lip colors and different makeup colors. So again, like same with Felicity on Thanksgiving, like they put her in some lipstick, right, when it's a little more mature.
Oh, yeah.
Those sneaky bastards.
Then we see Ben go to some like dump of a dorm room, and he's knocking on the door, and there's this guy who's on the phone wheeling around in his little rolling chair, and we figure out that this is Barry. And so he invites Ben in, says thanks for coming to see me. Ben's like, yeah, look, I know I owe you a lot of money, but if you could just spot me, I've got some good leads on some games that are coming up. I'm like, I don't know anything about gambling. I don't know like where you hear tips on who's going to win a game. Like, I don't know how that works, but Ben thinks he's got some leads on some games. But Barry says that he can't do that. He doesn't make a lot on his own, so he doesn't have enough money to spot people. So he says there is something Ben could do, though, to help make some of that money back. He says that Ben's not the only one with outstanding debts, and so Ben could help him collect some of those outstanding debts. Ben's like, look, I'm not going to be threatening anyone. But Barry's like, no, just the opposite. I need friendly dudes, right? So he gives him a list of people, sees to see if Ben knows any of them, and Ben says that one of the guys listed lives in his girlfriend's dorm. So Barry's like, oh, great. Yeah, then that works out well for both of us. And I thought Barry, too, looked like he was playing pretend and like playing as a grown-up. Like he just looked like a 12-year-old to me who's like playing pretend as an Ivy League asshole, like, oh, I'm a bookie and I'm running this thing out of my dorm room. I'm just like, dude, you're like 12.
This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, he was probably like the kid who got bullied in high school, and now he's like pretending he's hot shit.
Yeah, he was super cocky and gross.
I was surprised that he's another student, because in my head at first I was like, oh, Barry's just some bookie. And then when I think about a bookie, I don't think about a college student. I think about like some rough, middle-aged man like who's shady as shit. So that was a surprise. I was like, oh yeah, Barry's a student too. That's so weird.
But yeah, I mean, I don't condone violence, but like Ben does look like he could beat Barry up. So like again, the power dynamics are a little off. Like it felt very different. Like Ben looks more mature than this Barry guy, but Barry's the one that has all the power. So anyway, it was just interesting, the casting. But so then Ben goes to Kelvin to chat with Guy. So we find out that Guy is the one on the same floor as Felicity and Julie, who owes Barry a lot of money. So Ben sits down with him. It's like, hey, I'm Ben. He's like, yeah, you're Julie's boyfriend, right? It's like, yeah. But Ben's like, yeah, look, Guy, we've got a mutual friend, Barry. And Guy's attitude shifts kind of very quickly. He's like, are you going to beat me up? This feels so bad for Guys, like, are you gonna beat me up? But Ben's like, no, like Barry, Barry is a good guy. Like, it's just he's covering for you, and he doesn't make a lot of money on his own, but like he's got to use his own money to cover for people who don't pay. So he's in a real bind. I'm like, all right, I guess Ben, like this is the nicest way that a debt collector could go around and do this. But not a good
Pretty
situation
slick.
for Ben to be in here. Yeah. But Guy's got some cash. He's got like $30 in his pocket for working a week washing dishes someplace. And it's very sad. And so Ben's like, you know what? Forget it. Like, screw Barry, and he leaves. Because, yeah, that's just really depressing.
Well, how can Guy even afford to attend this university if he only makes $30 a week?
I don't know.
Surely he
Student
can't afford to
loans?
be
I don't
gambling. This
know.
is that's not a good choice.
Another fair point.
It's but here again is the role reversal where Ben went from the one in debt to being the collector. And he's occupying both of those roles at the same time, obviously, because he's trying to do this work to get out of debt. So it's like just another weird it's just the role identities are really complicated in this episode more than others I've noticed.
But yeah, I mean, he's in the same boat, so all of a sudden, like, he empathizes more with Guy than with Barry, so he like can't go through it. He's like, you only have $30, like, screw Barry, you know?
Well, exactly.
So,
That's these characters are being thrust into roles that they're not ready for, like Felicity being thrust into the role of, potentially assistant manager, and now he's being thrust into the role of a debt collector when he's the one who's usually getting hounded. So it's I think that would throw them off balance. A lot of the characters in the episode, this particular episode, it's like really unsteady ground that they're on.
Yeah. So then later, Ben is in the locker room, probably after swim practice, and Lynn kind of extends an olive branch to him. Just kind of small talking about their next swim meet, if they're ready to beat New Jersey. But then Lynn breaks it down. He's like, look, like, us talking is not, us not talking, this is stupid. Ben's like, well, we're talking right now. Lynn's like, look, since our tussle last week or whenever, like, just wants to make sure Ben's okay. Barry said that Ben hasn't paid yet, and Ben says that he will. And Lynn's like, look, if you need help, but then the coach comes in and interrupts and approaches Ben and says that, I guess, the bursar's office called and there's going to be a temporary suspension for Ben until tuition is paid. And so Ben's like, this has to be a mistake. I'll get it figured out. So, like, Lynn's offering help, but he kind of rejected him, and I don't know, it's just, yeah, he can't seem to accept help, and it's just very sad because now the situation's gotten very dire. Like, now we're almost at suspension here, so it's just really sad. Like, his friend just reached out to him, and he still can't accept that help, so it's, yeah, very sad to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And this reminded me of something funny, though, because as sad as that was and frustrating as that was, I like that Lynn was trying to be the bigger person and, like, let's make up, like, this is dumb, like, let's, get back to how we used to be. But I saw a meme recently, and it says something about trying to decide, should I be the bigger person or the bigger problem? And Ben's definitely choosing to be the bigger problem across the board this entire episode. It's like, it's a funny meme, but it's not funny to see somebody struggle like this. It's like, yeah, you're right. He just keeps on digging this hole deeper, or circumstances keep making it deeper.
And yeah, he just, like, can't accept help from his... He does have a support system. He just, like, won't take them up on it. And it's just, yeah, very hard to watch. But yes, he's being the bigger problem in this point. I love that. Not the bigger person. And Lynn's actually a good guy, too. Like, he can say some dumb things, but, like, he's a good guy. He's a good friend.
Yeah. That's what I've been seeing. And that's where I think his role is kind of changing a little bit, too, in this episode, where, because I know you all were kind of like, he's the one who got him into gambling in the first place. Like, Ben got himself into the gambling. Lynn, was talking about it. Maybe he did a little bit of peer pressure. So what?
Like, you went in, you want some, you got some. Like, come on in and I'll double it. I don't know. Yeah.
The intentions were good, though. He was trying to help his friend make some extra money.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how it shifts, quite a bit in this episode in particular, how he's more like trying to be more mature, trying to be more reasonable, trying to be a source of help and not kind of piling on. So that's interesting for him to shift to in that way. In a more obvious way.
Stupid again, which is good.
Yeah.
Then Ben goes to the bank to try and get a loan. So he's explaining to this banker that if he doesn't pay his tuition by next week, he's going to get kicked out, which means he won't get credit for all the classes that he's almost done with, which would be very bad, obviously. And Ben says, look, I'm going to be working all summer. So really, this is just like an advance on what I'm going to make, and I'll pay it back immediately after this summer, after I work. And the banker gets really excited. He's like, yeah, that's a great idea. An installment loan is like a perfect way to pay off debt. And so Ben is like finally hopeful. He's elated. But then the banker says, now you just need to find a co-signer. He's like, maybe our parents would co-sign? He's like, no, that's not going to happen. Said, what about one of our older, more settled friends? And who is that but Sean? He's old. He's older. I don't know if he's more settled.
Yeah, exactly.
So at the loft, Ben obviously asks him, and Sean says that he will do it. He'll co-sign. He's like, yeah, mentors are important, especially for, like, I have a mentor. They're so important for all of your business ventures. So he's kind of seeing himself, I guess, as like a mentor for Ben when it's like, dude, he just needs money. Come on. But Julie comes into the loft too, saying that Ben wasn't in class, and Ben lies to her and says that, like, oh yeah, I was just asking Sean, if he wanted to go to the library, instead of bringing up the fact that he's going to co-sign a loan for him. And so Julie goes into the other room and Sean asks Ben, like, you haven't told Julie about your money issues yet? Ben says, no, she doesn't need to know everything. She would just worry, which we hear that again later about a different person in Ben's life.
Well, that's his default mode. It's just to protect everybody and not receive any help whatsoever.
Well, do you think it really is him thinking about them and them worrying, or do you think some of it is like he's just embarrassed or like doesn't want to admit that there's an issue?
I think it's both. I think
Both.
it's both. And I don't think historically he's had a lot of experiences where he has had a support system that has come through, because this is really strong behavior to, strong rejecting behavior, help rejecting. So I don't get the impression that he's had those kinds of friendships or support before. So he doesn't know how to get help. I don't think it's simply he doesn't want to or he's too embarrassed. I don't think he knows how that looks and how it feels and that it turns out okay when that happens, because I don't think he has a lot of experience with it.
Gotcha. So even though people are offering, he's just like, help, what is that? I don't
feels
even know how to
weird.
deal with it. Okay.
Yeah, it's unusual, so he doesn't know how to navigate that, but he does know how to navigate doing things independently. I mean, quote unquote knows how. He's familiar with that. He's more comfortable with that, even though it's an uncomfortable situation.
And again, it's just so weird that like he's always helping other people too. So it's just so weird that like he can't accept it himself. It's a bummer.
It is.
So then back at Dean and Deluca, Felicity's working again, and Elena's visiting her and apparently tells her that she's working for McGrath, which surprises Felicity. She says, oh, isn't that intimidating? And Elena says that it was at first, but, he was emotional. It was weird seeing, your professor emotional. Then Danny comes in again late because of volunteer work at quote-unquote the orphanage. And he kind of like bumps into people too as he walks away from them. And I'm with Elena. Elena's like, is working you. And that's like exactly what I would have thought if I had seen everything up to that point. I'd be like, the orphanage, please, whatever. And he's like, oh, and I can't, come in Saturday. Well, that happens later. But like, he's like, oh yeah, he's always has all these excuses and he's so terrible at his job. I would be like Elena. I'd be skeptical, but.
Absolutely.
So then at the dorm, Noel is probably passing out floor calendars, because he always is. Slides one under the door, and Richard opens up the door, storms out in his boxers, complaining about the heat in his room. His whole room is filled with steam. Noel says that he should stay somewhere else until it's fixed. I guess they fixed, the heater, but it wasn't fixed properly, so Noel's going to have to get some help in to fix it. But unfortunately, Richard has no friends, so now he has to stay with Noel. And Noel was, I think, pretty gracious to let him stay with him, but I don't know, he probably just feels bad because he's supposed to fix the issue. Then at the bank, again, Ben is very, very grateful with Sean for, Sean co-signing and helping him. But the banker comes back in the room and says that Sean has credit issues. Sean's like, what, me? I have great credit. Like, what are you talking about? And apparently he, though, has some debt for bagel knobs, which are like donut holes, but with bagels. And he wants to like put cream cheese fillings in them. What do you think, y'all?
I would totally eat those.
Real. Have you guys not
No.
had them? Yes,
I can't
just
eat
had
bagel.
some.
Well, I want to know more about this because I can.
Oh. Okay. Well, lots of places have them now. Dunkin' has them. Just like local bakery by
I've
my
been to
house has them. I don't think they're called knobs, but
the
they're
bagel
just
knobs.
like
Once
bagel
again,
bite.
I find out I've been doing life wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for teaching me the way. I'm very excited because
There you
yeah,
go.
they
They're
sound
delicious.
delicious.
That makes sense that Duncan would do it because, like, I feel like they kind of came
Well,
up
because
with
they
the
have the
donut
donut
hole.
holes. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It's only natural they
Yeah.
would transition to the
Yeah.
bagel scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super good. You can get them with like the everything bagel, plain
I
bagel.
can and will.
Yeah, highly recommend.
Awesome. Very excited.
Wow, Sean was ahead of his time.
Truly.
Exactly.
He just was, yeah, he was too inspired at such a young age. But yeah, he says, look, once bagel knobs are a thing, once this blows up, I'm going to have the money to pay back the debt for that venture. But the banker isn't having it. And so he's like, well, can't do this today. And Ben blows up. He's like, how can you do this? Like, I need this loan. The banker's like, I'm sorry, but we can't. And he's like, you know what? You're not sorry. Don't say that. Sean's trying to settle him down. The banker leaves, and Sean's like, it's going to be all right. But Ben says, I'm not so sure. And yeah, he's starting to spiral now.
Yeah, I imagine too that sorry might be a trigger for him, actually. I just thought of this right now. I'm sure his father does that all the time because, part of the cycle of abuse, like, like the blow up and then the honeymoon phase afterwards where it's all apologies and everything's, sunshine and roses again. And it's probably a trigger, like, and that's why he's like, no, you're not sorry. Like, don't say that. Like, if you're sorry, you wouldn't have done that kind of thing. So nice.
Well, and yeah, I mean, that's just like a
Yeah, it's
customer
just-
service thing.
yeah,
I'm
a
so
s-
sorry. Like, he's not sincere about
Super,
it.
super disingenuous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then back at Dean and Deluca, Danny comes in from a overly long lunch and tells Felicity that he thinks his hand is getting an infection. And he's like, oh, and Felicity, I can't come in on Saturday because I have a doctor's appointment to drain the fluid from this bandaged hand, which is like completely covered up in bandages. And I'm like, how can he even work with one hand anyway? Like, shouldn't he be on disability or something? Like, I don't understand how he's even working. So this was the last straw for Felicity. She says, we need to talk, which is never good. But she tells him that she's got to let him go. He's like, go where? She says, out, out there. She's like, I'm firing you.
That was funny.
Yeah. He's like, go where? So yeah, he's eventually like, says he's sorry. He's like, good luck, and turns in his hat. So Felicity fires Danny finally.
Good for her, I guess. She's growing up now. Or is she?
Then we see Noel going back to his dorm room where Richard is already there, settled in nicely, reading his newspaper, drinking his coffee, still in his boxers on the floor in Noel's room, and greets him with a, hey, roomie. Well, but Noel's like, no, don't call me roomie. Like, this isn't permanent. And Richard is reading his mail and tells Noel that he got a summer internship in Berlin. And Noel is shocked and excited. But Richard says, what will Felicity think about this? Like, I thought I heard you two talking about spending some time together over the summer. But Noel says that was back before they broke up, and now they're just friends, and they're focusing on rebuilding things. Richard's like, well, what does that mean? Noel says, I have no idea. So Noel's confused about what this all means, and now what Berlin is going to possibly do to their rebuilding of their relationship or friendship. But Richard says that this is actually perfect. This is going to be the perfect way to find out Felicity's true feelings. Like, when you tell her the news, her face is going to say what she really feels in a split second before she actually comes up with the proper response to Noel, right? So if she looks really sad for a second, she's still in love with him. And if she, I guess, has no sign of anything on her face or is excited, then she's over him. They're just friends. So Noel said,
that's actually pretty smart.
I mean, it is.
Richard, I hate Richard, but I feel like that's a good way. Just like my face always gives away my emotion. Like, I could be lying about something, but then my face will give it away. So I think that's actually.
I mean, Noel does say well, I don't want to test Felicity like that.
Right.
And I could see where it's slightly manipulative, but he is gonna tell her anyway. And so it is true that her real reaction will probably show on her face. Yeah.
Do think that's an interesting insight from Richard. I don't like the game playing kind of aspect of it, but it is insightful. So, okay, yes, let's read people's nonverbals and see what kind of information we can get. I respect that on some level. But it's interesting, again, that Noel would go this route or, consider it and seem kind of like, okay, yeah, maybe I could do that versus...
After the whole go find out who Eli is advice?
Yeah, well, that too. But
That's
being
true.
more inclined to be like, what are we? And I'm surprised he wouldn't want to have this big conversation about what does this internship mean for us or not us, whatever us is or not is. So it's interesting that he even kind of entertained this idea versus being like, no, we're going to have a long ass talk about it. Like we have long ass talks about everything else.
Skip all of your classes today. We've got some talking to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as long as, like, after you get the gut reaction, you do say, like, well, what do you think about that? Like,
right.
Hopefully you do communicate eventually about this too, but that was insightful. And only because you brought this up, Joe, but again, the role reversal, you're so right, because now, like, Noel is sitting with Richard to get advice from Richard when he's the RA, right? Like, now Richard's in his room, it's his room too. It's very interesting.
Yeah, people are either kind of getting more on the same level or one's going down a step and one's going up a step. It's just like there's a lot of weird shifts happening.
So then Noel wraps up the conversation saying, don't you ever have class, Richard? The moving rooms is very stressful. He needs his downtime. And Noel says, well, can't you go get it somewhere else? And also, don't ever read my mail again, or you're going back in the hot box. Thought that was hilarious. Noel was very cute in this episode again. Sorry, not sorry.
Richard was hilarious in this episode, is that what I think you meant to say.
He was also very funny, yes.
He was exceptionally hilarious.
In
I
his
loved
little
him.
like blue plaid shirt.
It feels like whenever one of them, like if Noel's having a great episode where he looks really good and he's doing good things, then Ben's being a shit. And if Noel's being a shit, then Ben looks really
another role reversal.
Ben still visually looked hot, but his actions were
all
not
around.
Hot.
Yeah.
But that's another role reversal right there. It's just, one's off, the other one's on fire.
Well, and also, maybe we're getting too much on a tangent now, but like Felicity also was concerned for Ben, but she wasn't like going overly out of it. Like, yeah, she left her job because it was an emergency, but like she still came back with Noel. Like she wasn't obsessing about where Ben was, which is also very interesting.
Yes.
Normally she obsesses.
Absolutely. Things are changing.
But then back at the loft, Ben is on the phone talking to his mom, and he says that everything is fine with him. And he kind of rushes to get her off the phone, but he promises that everything is great. But, dear listener, everything is not great. Not at all.
Yeah. And again, another flip-flop here. He's being more of the protective one of his mother when she should, caregivers should be more protective of the child. But he's stepping in saying, like, I'm not going to tell her because I have to protect her from being worried. So it's just laying that on even more thick as the episode goes on. But it's more pronounced when it's, the mother-son relationship versus when he's kind of doing that with his friends.
Yeah. And again, just like, prior in the episode with Julie, he's like, oh, no, everything's fine. We're going to go to the library. And now with his mom, he's doing the same thing. So it's just, a repeated pattern here with him. Then we go to McGrath's office where Elena is working with him in, she says that she's, taken this filing system and changed it up into a more efficient way that she thinks he'll really like. And McGrath then kind of is almost like looking at her, like examining her, like contemplating something, and then asks her if she took any time off before school. Elena says, no, why? Like, oh, well, I just work with a lot of freshmen. You seem a little older than most freshmen. Like, you're more mature. And barf. That just barf.
Yeah. Big time.
Gross, Prince Humperdinck.
Gross, Jack Skellington.
Yeah. I'm going to add a puke sound effect later.
Thank you. It's needed there.
Yeah. But
it'll be the McGrath sound effect.
Sound effect, yeah. Yeah, but it's like grooming much? Like, it's, let's talk about some red flags here. You already mentioned, do you have extra time in the evenings, which is a little bit
why does she
sketchier
have
than
to
during
do the
the
work?
day.
Why does she have to do the work in the evening? Why can't she do it whenever she's free? Ugh.
Exactly. And then him opening up a little bit where he's like knocking down a little bit closer. Are you friends? Are you peers? Are you colleagues? It's like, no, you're not. So like, why are you opening up about personal stuff? And now this, like, oh, you seem a little bit, that whole like, you're so mature for your age kind of vibes. Like, that's, yeah, lots of red flags and lots of, like little breadcrumbs here, grooming happening.
Yeah. So then Elena explains to him that her mom died of cancer when she was young, so she had to learn how to take care of herself pretty early on. And McGrath kind of thinks about that for a second and sees it as an opportunity to share that yesterday, when he was looking upset in his office before, he found out that his ex-wife has lymphoma. And she says that she's sorry and he is too. So I don't know how far we want to get into this as a group here. But I also think there was like an emotional connection happening here. Like she mentioned the cancer, so then he mentions cancer.
Latched right onto that.
Yeah, and I think that that's just suspicious too.
Yeah, that's kind of convenient diagnosis.
Yeah, it's just there.
Yeah.
It was a little sus, but it's in passing. So that could explain why he was upset on the phone.
But that's the thing.
Or upset that day. Yeah.
These gestures that are quote unquote in passing when really there's so much intention behind them. And these, these words and revelations are chosen very carefully to just get a little bit closer and closer. And just, that theme again is like he's getting more on that personal level versus professional level. And that's inappropriate. He doesn't need to share that even if he does have that in common. Because I can think to myself, there are a gazillion times I could have disclosed something to a patient, like it was a very similar thing, and I could have been like, oh yeah, that totally happened to me too, or whatever. But that's not appropriate. So you don't do that unless it's very intentional for the patient's benefit, not for, the therapist's benefit. And this was clearly seems like he's laying some groundwork to benefit himself.
Yeah. And, on the pod, we try not to do any big spoilers here. But I feel like they've been teasing this throughout the season. Like she mentions like, oh, he's got that like dark, sexy thing going on.
Yeah,
she talks about him a little bit that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we won't give away any big spoilers here, but
there's something building up
clearly,
here.
There's something starting here. We don't like it.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to think back then. I don't know when I was a kid in middle school if I really saw this as like a huge problem yet. Like I probably wasn't like, oh, he's dreamy, right? Because he's like 50. I don't know. But I don't know if I would have seen it as a huge problem. And I was just thinking about other shows too back then that might have had like a teacher-student relationship in them. The first one that came to mind was Dawson's Creek, like season 1, Pacey
iconic.
And his English teacher. Yeah, iconic. But that show, I feel like the way they were positioning that was like, unrequited, or not unrequited, but like star-crossed lovers, like we're not supposed to be together, but we both want each other and blah, blah, like, oh, Pacey's dreaming about her.
Yeah, it's like this fantasy come true.
Like they tried to make it more
romanticized.
Sexy. Yeah, and this to me, I was actually getting the ick now watching this because there didn't feel like feelings there. There was something off about these scenes between them that I don't think like Dawson's Creek did back in the day. So again, I think this show was probably just really ahead of its time for this type of relationship.
Yeah, and that speaks not just to the writing, but to the acting too, that you can pick up, because the words on this, on a page for the scripts, like, that could look like anything, but the actors are really stepping into this and leaning into this and creating that ick response. So I think that's really cool.
I know you're a big Saved by the Bell fan, and so that was the only other storyline I could think of where there's a professor. Was it Saved by the Bell? The professor and Kelly, right? Okay.
Yeah, it was the Saved by the Bell, the college years. Kelly and her Professor Lasky.
Yes.
They like genuinely like dated though.
But he wasn't fired,
and he had like a daughter
for that.
Gosh, I think there was like some investigation or something, but she wasn't like in his class anymore. I don't remember.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if there were any.
I watched.
Couldn't remember if there were any consequences in that one.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I do think Dawson's Creek was on the few where it was like a woman
Yeah, that's
true.
teacher with the male student. So it's kind of different, I think, when they make it like the older, gross man professor with a woman. Oh, I don't know. I feel like every teen drama has had this situation.
Well, Dr. Joe was also talking about Pretty Little Liars, which was like one of the biggest plot points in the whole series, throughout the whole series, that started literally in the pilot. It was a high school student and a teacher, and it was gross. Again, star-crossed lovers, romanticized.
So big, in fact, that I didn't even realize, I mean, that I realized it, and I didn't even watch the show. That's how big of a plot point it was. I never even watched it, but I was aware of that. And yeah.
Well, even Buffy, like Xander goes on the date with his teacher who's like
praying mantis. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
At least they like appropriately made her a villain, like a predator.
Yeah, like she is literally a man-eater.
So that was at least a good message there.
Let that be a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of where it all started. There's probably we're kind of talking about shows from the 90s or early 2000s, but I bet you there's some shows from the 70s, like some soap opera that we're just not aware of that had that. But I would love to know. I'm going to have to go down a little rabbit hole later with my ADHD self and see what happens.
Or doesn't it like really all start with Lolita, that book? I've never read it because it just, again, plot grosses me out. But I feel like that's where kind of a lot of this started in pop culture.
Interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, moving on from predatory relationships, back at the loft, Ben, we see, is rummaging through some things, and Julie comes out into the living room and sees him, and he turns around and looks really guilty, says he didn't know she was here, which I also think is weird. I'm like, why is she there all the time, like to the point where your boyfriend doesn't even know you're there? But I digress. So she asks what he was doing, and he kind of hems and haws for a little bit, but I think he realizes, like, there's no excuse I can come up with this quickly that would make sense. So he says he was putting Sean's watch back. He took it before, and he was going to sell it at the local pawn shop, but he put it back, so I guess he decided against it. And he, without Julie really saying, he was like, yeah, I know, I'm disgusting. And Julie asks him if he can ask his parents for help, but Ben says he won't give his dad the satisfaction. And then Julie says, well, what about your mom? And Ben blows up at her. He's like, just stop. You have no idea what you're talking about. Sean comes in and is like, hey guys, what's going on? What's up? But Ben just tells Julie, like, you should tell him what I did because he should know, and he storms off. Ooh.
That was intense, yeah.
Yikes. Not cool of him to yell at Julie, especially like he was giving her advice when she was going through her rape, and he doesn't know what
with
that's
all of her mom
either.
stuff with her parents.
Yeah. Not cool.
Again, he has no experience getting help. Yeah. I don't think it's okay that he yelled at her either, but he literally does not know how to get help. He doesn't. He just doesn't. That's really tragic.
Yeah. And I think he probably also just thinks all of that is pointless. Like, why would he go to his parents for help? You know?
Yeah, how much have they helped him up to this
point?
Dad
created the problem. Yeah.
Exactly.
But, I mean, I guess it's the one good thing is that he didn't actually sell the watch. I don't know. It's brutal.
Yeah, and I was surprised that he was just like, yep, this is what I was doing. You busted me. And he just blurted it out. I was kind of surprised that he... So at least there's that he's starting to tell the truth because he's keeping a lot from her, but now he's at least letting some of this kind of come through a little bit more.
And it's funny because clearly she does know he's having money issues. So even though he's trying to hide stuff, like she still knows. So
yeah, especially because she is there all the time.
Even when he doesn't know it.
Yeah, like when he said, "Oh, that's my girlfriend's dorm," I'm like, "Is it? Does she live there? How can you call that her dorm? What are you saying?"
So
like she's never fucking
she lives
there.
At the loft.
Yeah, it's weird.
So then we see Noel go to Dean Deluca to tell Felicity about Berlin after Richard pushes him to ask her, just so that like at least he'll know one way or the other. So he starts to tell Felicity that he found out some interesting news, but she's like turned away from him making coffee at an espresso machine, so he can't see her face. So he starts like stalling the conversation as she's making this coffee until she eventually turns around and looks at him. And so he tells her about the internship, and she does look a little bit down or disappointed before she says, "Wow, that's really great. Congratulations." And so then, of course, his face lights up because he's happy that she would be sad about him leaving. But then, of course, Danny is back, and he's complaining about the schedule, that Abby wouldn't do it that way. And Felicity's like, "Wait, Danny, what are you doing here? Like, I fired you." And Danny says, "Oh, I decided. You can't fire me. You're not the real boss of me," which sounds like a 5-year-old. Like, "You're not the boss of me." And so he's just decided he's going to keep working, which I guess he kind of has a point, though. Like, she isn't his boss.
Yeah, she ain't shit right now.
It's really Abby's fault that this all happened.
It is Abby's fault. But also, this reminded me of a Seinfeld episode. I believe it was George was trying to break up with somebody, and she's like, "I don't accept it." And she just kept on not being broken up with him.
Good.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Nope, I'm not fired. Good for you, man.
Hey, anyone who's been laid off, try that next time. It was like, "No, I don't accept that. I don't accept you laying me off." So it's evening again, and so Elena is working with McGrath in his dimly lit office. I mean, I know the whole show is dimly lit, but it's a very dimly lit office, and they're kind of chatting. It's extra dim. There's like one light on. And they're chatting / teasing each other a little bit about jazz music, which, again, ick.
I was just thinking it's just kind of more of that sliding into that casual versus professional kind of status. You know, it's like the boundaries blurring more and more and more the longer the episode goes on.
And like he's not at his desk and she at a different desk. Like they're on couches closer to each other too. Like the scene, it just felt closer together too and less professional. Like, oh, we're both just sitting on the couch flipping through our papers at night.
Talking about music. Yeah. You know, it's like it seems way too intimate, way too casual. Like put on a lab coat, you know, put on some goggles or something. Like do something.
Go to the file cabinets.
Yeah, the actual file cabinets where you're supposed to be filing.
Yeah. But then McGrath gets a phone call from someone that he calls Sweetheart, and he's talking about sending something to them. So Elena, I think, feels a little awkward maybe, so she gets up to leave and give him some privacy. But McGrath hangs up and says that it was his 13-year-old daughter, that it was her birthday, and she thought that he forgot to send her a gift. So Elena looks a little bit relieved. She, you know, clearly has some sort of a maybe crush going on. But McGrath says that his assistant comes back tomorrow, so he wants to thank her properly for all her help this week. Elena's like, "Oh, no problem. Like, I think she'll love the filing system." And she starts to say, like, "Oh, I'll see you in class," and starts to leave. But then she whirls around and asks if he wants to go out to dinner sometime. He says, "Oh." And then he kind of thinks for a second and says that he's flattered, but he doesn't think it's a good idea. So Elena says, "Oh, sure, yeah, I'll see you in class." And as she leaves, shuts the door, she's clearly embarrassed, like, "Oh God, what did I just do?" and walks away. And I feel very uncomfortable again.
Yeah, and I don't think that's an accident. I think, you know, there's this part of that grooming process too. Like there's a bigger picture here, and he's just kind of setting up, like, kind of dangling this bait here and seeing, you know, like what's gonna happen, you know, how's she going to react to all this?
Yes, all part of his plan.
He's playing the long con right now. This is just another piece of the puzzle.
Like, because if he was like, "Yeah, let's go out
I want to thank you properly,"
it would be, like, too much.
Yeah,
it's
still so
he has to like kind of pretend like he's
exactly
against it at first to, like, you know, put up this facade that he's trying to do the right thing, but really he knows he's
exactly
and make it seem like it was her idea.
Exactly.
That, like, she asked him out.
That role reversal again. Like she's like, oh, she's the one pursuing him, not the other way around. It's like bullshit, motherfucker.
Yeah, you're the one like sitting with her in your office in the dark on the couch. Yeah, it's gross. I don't like it. So then Ben goes to Epstein to chat with Lynn, and Lynn says that Barry's been calling him all day. What's the deal? And says that he's been in these situations too. He's been lost. He's acted like an idiot. Like, look, before you do something you'll regret. But then Barry interrupts. So I don't know if Lynn was going to get through to him or not, but Barry
Fucking
shows
Barry.
up. Fucking Barry, little child. And he's like, oh, I didn't think you'd be here. Or like, what's up? You know, what about the list of dudes that you're supposed to get my money from? And Ben says, turns out he had to work, so he couldn't take care of any of those guys. But Barry doesn't buy it. He's talking very loudly to Ben and then says to Lynn, like, hey, you shouldn't serve him. You know he doesn't pay up. So then Ben says, what's your problem? But Barry says, Ben's the one with the problem. So Ben, though, I will give him his credit here. He does try to leave and just separate himself from the situation. Like, tells Lynn, like, I'm going to get out of here. He does try to leave, but Barry, like, physically gets in his way. He cannot leave. Still don't love it, though. Ben then pushes Barry over into a table and knocks everything down. And Ben leaves, and so Barry's now pissed. Well, still pissed, I guess, but even more pissed. And Lynn's like, look, Barry, go easy on him. He's strapped right now. But Barry's like, where's your phone? And he's like, I'll find it anyway. So he's going to go call some people. Not a good situation.
That escalated quickly.
Very.
But I think Ben's history of violence that he's observed probably has resolved problems and shut down whatever the situation was pretty quickly. So he's not used to seeing the situation escalate. Again, obviously none of us are okay with any kind of violent stuff. It's just, I think historically he's learned that when you're aggressive, you get your way and the problem goes away. Not the problem gets bigger and escalates exponentially.
And yeah, he does look like he could take Barry. Like, Barry's a little shit, right?
Yeah.
So like he's probably like, this guy's not going to really do anything to me, but he can call people who can.
Yes,
which is
can call in
scary.
reinforcements.
But then at Dean and Deluca, Danny's sweeping and being an imbecile, while Felicity looks like she's like managing the books and closing up for the night. And the phone rings, and it's Julie calling from Epstein Bar, asking if she's seen Ben. She said like she doesn't really know what happened, but apparently there was an argument, and Lynn heard Barry call his frat buddies, and Lynn thinks that they're going to do something to Ben. And so Sean's at the loft waiting in case Ben comes home. Lynn went out to look for him. So Julie's like, I feel like I need to go look for him, but she doesn't want to go alone. So Felicity's like, yes, I will be there 100%. And I know, again, I give Julie a lot of crap, but I do think she's like really good and supportive girlfriend to Ben in these moments in particular. Like, she is concerned about him. She does want to go and do something. Like, even though he's pushing her away, she's still trying to help.
Yeah.
So
and
I do
spiraling
appreciate her there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so since Felicity has to go help, she asks Danny to finish closing up for her. And Danny says no immediately. He's like, no, I can't do this. But Felicity's like, look, it's an emergency. I know you can do this. And she just kind of gives him the keys and leaves.
Just another flip-flop here. She went from you're fired to I know you can close the store. What the hell? And it's just interesting the urgency with which they approach things. And I get, yeah, like they're worried about Ben, but it sounds like Lynn just ran out on his job, and that's what she's doing now too. It's like, it's just interesting. I think maybe Lynn could get away with it a little bit more because nobody's like, hey, I'm trying to promote you right now. But for her to just walk out on her job, and I don't know how close she was to closing because she was like, it looked like they were wrapping up, like if she was like kind of doing the books or whatever. Why she couldn't be like, okay, meet me at Dean and Deluca in half an hour and then we'll go from here. Instead of just
or like I'll meet you as soon as I'm done closing.
Yeah, like I'm gonna close. I absolutely am gonna help you because who knows how long it's gonna take to look for him. But it's like you can't wait half an hour or however. It's like it's just a lot. It's just a lot.
Well, and also if she fired Danny, like wouldn't there be other employees there too that she did have on the schedule?
Right. I just think
why like they're the only two people there.
Why is he the best option? It's like that's so reckless. It's like even for Felicity, like that's a little bit over the top for something that she really could have just wrapped up and been like, I will meet you. Just hang tight.
Yeah. But Ben is out walking, and I think it looked like he was getting near the loft because I thought I heard him like fumbling with his keys. So it sounded like maybe he was getting close to the loft. But he accidentally bumps into some guys that are walking by. But it's not just some guys, it's the frat buddies who then jump Ben and they beat him up and leave him on the ground, just like coughing and writhing.
Honestly, I'm surprised
not good.
we don't see him in the cut to him at the hospital. Like, I'm surprised because I mean, there's no way he didn't get some ribs broken. You know, like they really could have done some really bad damage if he really did get jumped by that many dudes at the same time. Like he'd be in the hospital.
Unless he just wouldn't go, even if he did have a broken, you know, like he might just not even go still.
I don't know. I think he'd have to if you really got jumped by that many people. I don't think you'd have a choice at that point. Like, I think he'd be really impaired and would absolutely need medical attention. So.
Probably doesn't have insurance.
He got university insurance.
Wouldn't have a way to pay for it.
Point.
Although his tuition's not paid, so he probably doesn't have the university health insurance either.
Exactly.
Great.
Then we go back to Kelvin after Felicity was out looking for Ben, and she's with Noel, and they're walking together back to the dorm because Noel was also helping them look for Ben. So they stop in front of Noel's door, and he assures Felicity that Ben's going to be fine, but he's like, look, let me know no matter what time it is, like if you hear from them or if Ben gets back, which I thought was nice since they're not really best friends.
Yeah, that was decent of him.
Yeah. But they do say goodnight, and Noel leans in to kiss her on the cheek. And then he says, oh, well, going beyond friendship, though. And Felicity chimes in and says, oh, we could both get really hurt. We're like, yeah, we could. But then Noel leans in for the real thing. So they kiss, and then Felicity says, well, friends can kiss, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. And then they keep kissing. And then stupid Richard opens the door of Noel's room and kind of glares at Felicity, and he's like, where have you been? I've been worried sick. You know, he plays like the mom / wife / girlfriend of Noel.
Yes.
Like, I was worried sick. Don't you have class in the morning? He's like, so are you coming in or not? And Noel just like closes the door on and apologizes for Richard. But Felicity says that she should go see if Julie called anyway, so she goes back to her room.
More brilliant writing here with, again, the role reversal, because earlier in the episode, he's like, don't you have class? And now Richard's throwing that right back at him. Like, and yeah, that going from the kind of like getting baby, like, oh, it's hard to move. I have to lay here and, you know, take care of myself, to being like this, the authority again, like the wife or the
overprotective,
whoever. Somebody. Yeah. So that's funny. But I thought it was played brilliantly. I thought it was so funny.
And that, like, Felicity is this charlatan, like, wooing him, you know, like, oh, she's the reason you were out late. That's funny.
Yeah. Just plays more into that greater theme of the episode. It's good stuff.
But Felicity tells Sally that Julie did call, but unfortunately no one had still heard from Ben. And it's now 7 a.m. and no one knows where he is. So she goes to work and knocks on the door. She's dressed in her manager outfit still, but Danny answers the door in the manager's uniform as well. And he's all chipper. He's on the phone. Dean Deluca, this is Danny. How can I help you? And all of a sudden he's just like super capable and his hand is fine. And yeah, apparently Abby came back and promoted him because he closed up for one night. And that was just amazing, supposedly. But Abby's there, and she tells Felicity that she was going to fire her for doing such an irresponsible thing as leaving Danny to close up by himself. But Danny convinced her not to fire Felicity. And of course, a nun appears then with a gift from the children at the orphanage for his volunteer work. And there's, a little like thank you card sign thing. And so he invites the nun in and they leave. And Abby's like, oh my God, Danny, he's like an angel. And I just think it's all very convenient that he all of a sudden is like this super capable person who isn't some sad sack Eeyore type that like, oh, I can't do anything right. Like, what happened? What's the 180 here? I don't understand.
Maybe he just needed the chance to be in charge, and that like motivated him enough to actually be manager material.
Just needed the challenge.
That'll do it. But again, here's that massive flip-flop we're seeing just thematically in the episodes. Like, he was so incapable, such a bumbling fool before a buffoon. And now he's got his shit together and he's being recognized, by this nun and all this stuff. And it's like, and I think that plays well into the scene that follows this, where it's a seemingly sudden change, but is it really? Like, were we really being played the whole time, by Danny and by somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So after class, after one lecture, Elena is heading out, but McGrath stops her and asks to speak with her for a minute. And it's awkward because she's still thinking about her embarrassing moment asking him out to dinner where he said no. But she goes into the room with him, and he said that he was thinking about her question about going to dinner. And she's like, oh, yeah, about that. And really, and he's like, no, I think it's a good idea if the offer is still good. And Elena says, of course it is. And again, barf sound effect.
Yeah. And again, here's that sneaky flip-flop, sneaky switcheroo, where it's like first, he set up all the pieces for her to pursue him and rejected her, and now he's the one pursuing again. He's initiating now because she already opened that door because he laid out all the pieces for her to do that. So yeah. And it seems like
probably making her feel insecure,
exactly,
and second guessing herself, and now there's a validation.
Yep, the whole thing. So again, it's like with Danny, it's like it seems like a sudden change, but Elena called him out early on, like he's playing you, but she's got blinders on in her own situation where she can't pick up on the ick because she's too deep
Elena.
in it. Because she's very perceptive, to call he's playing you.
Yeah.
Immediately, she's seen Danny for like 2 seconds, and she's like, he's playing you. She knows immediately, but with this guy, he did that whole grooming process, and she got sucked in, and here we are.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I hate it.
This just reminded me of another teacher-student thing. Did you guys watch Boy Meets World?
Yes.
There's a episode where Fred Savage guest stars, and he plays like the teacher, and he hits on Topanga. That made me think about this because he was like super creepy and kind of groomy in that one too.
And he did also have some sort of like not a trial, but like a trial in front of the deans or something, right? I think there were consequences for him, and they recognized him as like, that is gross. Yeah. Oh yeah, Corey's brother. That's right.
Every show has one. Every show, I promise you.
So then finally, Felicity tells Sally that it had been almost 24 hours of not hearing from Ben. We see her sleeping in her room, and she hears a knock at the door. And it's Ben, and he is all beat up. He's got like blood down the front of his shirt. Like, it looked bad. He asks if he can come in. Of course, he can, and then he kind of looks at himself in the mirror, probably symbolizing that he's like seeing what's become of him, right?
Big yikes.
Yeah, but Felicity asks if he's called Julie or Sean yet, but he says like, no, those guys probably don't want to talk to me, and I don't blame them. And she, of course, says like, I think you're wrong, you should probably call them. And he says that he will, but he just asks her if he can hang out in her room for a little bit. And this brought back memories of Hot Objects when he wants to sleep in her room. Like, he can go to anyone, but he goes there to sleep on, or I guess on Megan's bed. He was probably going to sleep on the floor. And then after the Halloween stuff, he would like go to her room. So this was just very reminiscent to me of those early episodes.
Anytime he's got his turmoil, he goes to Felicity.
And not his girlfriend. But
in this case, he very blatantly believes and, verbalizes like, I don't think they want to talk to me. So he doesn't even think that's an option. So it's not like he's like, well, I could go talk to my girlfriend. He doesn't think that's an option. He's like, thinks he's a piece of shit because he's been acting, he's been wilding out. He's been spiraling.
You know who likes pieces of shit? Felicity.
Oh, there you go.
Well, he could have just gone to be by himself somewhere in a park or whatever. He didn't have to go see her.
Or he could have gone to Lynn's, but he probably thinks none of them would. But Felicity's very forgiving and understanding, so probably a good bet that she'll let him in. So they sit down together, and he tells her that lately he's been noticing that he's been turning into his dad. He just gets into a fight every time that he gets pissed off. So Felicity asks if his parents know what's going on with him, and he says that his dad, no, his dad hasn't called in months, and his mom calls all the time, though, since she left his dad. And so he explains that like his mom has the chance to be happy for the first time in her life ever, and that if she knew what was going on with him, she would be very, very worried. And he says that he screwed up her life enough, which again, just very sad to think that he thinks like it's his fault that she's divorced or screwed up her life. It's just, yeah, that's really sad. But Felicity, in her infinite wisdom, says, maybe you should let her worry. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. They're still his parents. She says, let your mom be your mom. Let her take care of you. Let her worry about you. And that's my angsty away message of the week. I don't know if I would really put that up on an away message, but like that was the angstiest thing I think that was said probably. And was still very like sweet and nice too. So he then says he doesn't know though. He's like, I don't know. He's still not sure if he wants to let his mom in like that. But we do see Ben in slow motion going back to the loft. And inside the loft, Sean is asleep in a chair, and he's like got the phone in his lap. His hand is on the receiver, which was just very sweet. Like, I know Sean can be overbearing and intrusive, but like he was clearly very concerned about Ben too, and like waiting for the phone to ring. And Julie is asleep on the couch and perks up the second that Ben walks in. Then we also see that Lynn is there too, asleep on another couch that they have. And I just thought that scene in particular was very beautiful. It like shows that Ben does have a really good support system and people who care about him, and maybe he can finally start to feel that in this moment, because Julie goes up to hug him, and then immediately Lynn and Sean go up to hug him too. And so his friends really rallied around him in this moment, even though he feels like he has just disgraced all of them.
You know what, though? You mentioned the Halloween episode, and that just got me thinking right now. You know, they're highlighting the support system, but remember when they got robbed and everybody was rallying around Felicity and she was handling it pretty well? And I was like, Ben's the one who needs the help. And people are like, Sean was like, you didn't even try to get my notebook from them. Like, so it was the opposite. He really didn't have that display earlier on in the season. So I could kind of see, not just because of his upbringing, but historically, like he was going through a hard time and people were kind of being like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And they were rallying around.
Well, that was also
her.
like one of the first, if not the first episodes where we saw Sean. So they also maybe just like weren't even close friends yet, but like maybe now at this point
still,
in the season, they are actually friends.
It's in his memory. Right. It's in his, you know, it's filed away. Like, if I need something from these people, I can't count on them, or what I can't count on is getting blamed for whatever bad thing happened. So he's got these past behaviors to predict future behavior, even though things have changed, and he does have the support now. But I could see why he would have come to that conclusion earlier, just because of all his past experiences.
That's true. He'd be like, oh, where's my rent?
Yep.
In this situation, yeah. Then we do see Ben get on the phone and finally call his mom, and he gets right into it and says that things aren't so good. And that's the last scene. Again, we don't hear back from Sally, but again, Felicity kind of sallied the situation for Sally, and actually gave Ben some good advice for once.
It was solid. And I appreciate his insight when he's just like, I realize I'm turning into my dad. Like, at least he was able to take a step back at the end of all of that and recognize what was happening to him, like what he was becoming and what he was doing, and that was all not good stuff. I really appreciate that he named it and, you know, spoke it.
And he was probably at like his rock bottom too.
Yeah.
I mean, beaten up on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
It's hard to get lower than that.
So I thought it was so sweet. I love that the phone was in Sean's hand, and I love that Lynn was there too. It's like, even though Ben did everything he could to push these people away, they said, no, we're not going anywhere. So that's pretty incredible. Like, not just the support system, but that they took so much from him in these last few episodes. You know, the shenanigans with all the gambling stuff. They really came through in such a big way. So I'm surprised too. So he would be surprised. He like kind of put everybody through hell the last few days.
Yeah, I pushed everyone away. Like, they're not going to want to hear from me. Because, yeah, some people could have just said, oh, you don't want my help? Fine, screw you, you know? So it is, yeah. I like that there's that much support and friendship at the end of the season here. Yeah. Well, our hate counter this week was only 9. It was an intense one. I'm glad we got through it. And I think the last 2 here, there's drama, but it's like spicy drama.
Juicy stuff.
So we don't have to get so intense, I don't think.
Oh, yeah.
It was this was a rough one. But
I enjoyed it. I'm wondering, why do you think the episode is called Connections?
well, with you talking about all the role stuff, I was actually going to bring it up too. I feel like for some of the like Felicity and Noel are trying to figure out their connection. And then obviously Elena and McGrath are forming a new connection. A bad one, but a new one. But yeah, I didn't know how to connect connections to like the main Ben storyline. So I was gonna ask you all too if you had thoughts.
Yeah. It's just like the role stuff, like how are we connected to our different roles, I guess. I don't know, because it's like kind of on a spectrum. It's like we're on one side in one situation and on the other side, the other situations. Like it's, but I would name the episode like Instability or something, or like Unstable Identity.
Rock bottom.
Yeah.
Something like that. But yeah, Connections kind of threw me off. I was being curious about that after I recognized the theme that was coming through. Connections didn't quite fit for me, so it's just kind of curious about that.
No.
Or maybe they just like had to rely on their strong connections with each other as friends. I don't know. Yeah. I was also struggling. I'm like, why is it? I was trying like, what's the theme? And I was like, what is this connection theme? I like your theme better, Dr. Joe.
I don't know what I'd name the episode though. It's like nothing cute. Doesn't have a nice ring to it.
Assistant to the regional manager.
Yeah.
It's now called Booger. Righty, well, 2 more episodes to go. Thank you all, as always, for listening. We will catch up with you again next week for The Force. Very excited.
Yes.
Bye.
See you next time.
Felicity Was Here is produced, written, and edited by Heather, Melissa, and Dr. Joe. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Felicity Was Here Pod. If you're enjoying the pod, please leave us a review and help us spread the word. We appreciate you and would love to hear from Felicity superfans like us. So send us your feedback, ask us your burning questions, or just say hey at felicitywasherepod@gmail.com. We may even read your note in a future episode. Talk to you all next week.